The carriage that arrived at Ashworth Hall that morning carried the wrong sister. Everyone would say it was a mistake. The mother said it, the sister said it, even the servants who packed her trunk in the dark said it. But a mistake requires an accident, and what happened to Beatrice Fairfax was no accident. It was a trade. They sent the daughter they could afford to lose. What they didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that the Duke had asked for her by name. Beatrice Fairfax learned early in life that some daughters are loved, and some daughters are useful. She was the useful one. At 26 she still lived in her father's house, though her father had been dead for 8 years and the house had long stopped feeling like his. It belonged now to her stepmother, Lady Fairfax, and to her younger half-sister, Rosalind. Beatrice belonged to it the way a chair belongs to it, or a broom. Every morning she rose before the servants. She managed the accounts her stepmother refused to look at. She mended the gowns Rosalind tore and never thanked her for. And every evening she ate her supper alone in the small room beside the kitchen, because Lady Fairfax said her presence at the dining table dampened the mood. "You have your father's plainness," her stepmother liked to say, in the light, pleasant voice she used for cruel things. "It cannot be helped, but it can be hidden." So Beatrice was hidden. When guests came, she stayed upstairs. When invitations arrived, they were answered for two, Lady Fairfax and Miss Rosalind Fairfax. As far as the county knew, the late Baron Fairfax had one daughter, and she was beautiful. Rosalind was beautiful. Even Beatrice could not deny it. Golden hair, a laugh like little bells, and a gift for crying at exactly the right moment. Every penny left in the estate had been spent on her gowns, her music masters, her season in London. Lady Fairfax called it an investment. "Rosalind will marry a great man," she declared at least once a week, "and then we shall all be saved." They needed saving. Beatrice knew this better than anyone because Beatrice kept the books. The debts had grown so large that she had stopped writing the numbers in ink. Pencil felt less permanent, less like drowning. And then on a gray Tuesday in October, the letter came. Beatrice was in the hall when the footman brought it in, and she saw the seal before anyone else did. A stag's head pressed in dark blue wax. The seal of the Duke of Ashworth. Lady Fairfax snatched it from the tray so fast she nearly tore it. Her eyes flew across the page once, twice, and then she pressed the letter to her chest and laughed out loud, a sound Beatrice had not heard in years. "He has offered," she gasped. "The Duke of Ashworth has offered marriage." Rosalind came flying down the stairs. "The Duke, the one with 40,000 a year." Mama read it aloud. Lady Fairfax read it aloud, most of it. The Duke wrote briefly and coldly, like a man drafting a contract, which in truth he was. He proposed a marriage between himself and the daughter of the late Baron Fairfax. In exchange, all debts attached to the Fairfax estate would be settled in full within the month. "All of them," Lady Fairfax whispered, "every last one." "But why?" Rosalind asked, twirling in the middle of the hall. "He's never even met me. They say he never comes to town. They say he never dances, never calls on anyone. They say he's as cold as a church floor in January. They say he is a Duke *," her mother snapped. "That is the only thing they say that matters." No one asked Beatrice's opinion. No one noticed her standing by the window at all. That was ordinary. What was not ordinary was the small, strange thing she had glimpsed when the letter first came out of its envelope. A second page, folded behind the first. Lady Fairfax had read that page silently, and her face had flickered just for an instant with something that looked almost like confusion. Then she had tucked the second page into her sleeve, and it was never mentioned again. For 2 weeks the house was a storm of dressmakers and trunks and Rosalind singing. The wedding arrangements moved with astonishing speed. The Duke, it seemed, wanted no engagement season, no London announcement, no fuss. A bride was to be delivered to Ashworth Hall by the 1st of November, married quietly, settled quickly. Like buying a horse, Rosalind giggled. And then, 3 days before the 1st of November, everything fell apart. Beatrice heard the shouting from the bottom of the stairs. She found Lady Fairfax in Rosalind's bedroom, white with rage, holding a letter in her shaking hand, and Rosalind on the bed, weeping into her pillow, her trunk half-packed beside her. Not packed for Ashworth Hall. Packed to run. Lieutenant Asterisk, Lady Fairfax was hissing. A penniless lieutenant with nothing but a red coat and a smile, and you would throw away a duke. I love him, Rosalind sobbed. I won't marry that cold, dreadful man, Mama, I won't. I'll run away with Edward tonight, I swear I will, and then the scandal will ruin everything and you'll get Asterisk nothing. Silence. Beatrice, frozen in the doorway, watched her stepmother's face change. The rage drained out of it slowly, and something colder moved in behind the eyes. Something that was already calculating. Lady Fairfax turned her head, and for the first time in what felt like years, she looked directly at Beatrice. You, she said softly. Beatrice's stomach dropped. Ma'am. The letter says the daughter of the late Baron Fairfax Asterisk. Lady Fairfax began to smile. It does not say which one. Mama, Rosalind said, sitting up, tears forgotten. Mama, you can't be serious. Look at her. I am looking at her. Lady Fairfax circled Beatrice slowly, the way a farmer circles livestock. The Duke has never seen either of you. By the time he realizes what he's been sent, the contract will be signed, the banns read, the debts paid. A duke does not send a bride back like a spoiled parcel. The scandal would be unbearable for Asterisk him. He will swallow it. He'll be furious, Rosalind said. Let him be furious at Asterisk or Asterisk. Lady Fairfax shrugged. What does it matter? She'll be his problem then, and we shall be free. Beatrice found her voice at last. It came out smaller than she wanted. And if I refuse? Lady Fairfax stopped in front of her. She reached out and touched Beatrice's cheek, almost gently, which was somehow worse. Refuse, she said. My dear girl, where would you go? Who in this county even knows you exist? You will do this because it is the only useful thing you have ever been offered. And because if you don't, the gentle voice did not change at all. I will put you out of this house with nothing but the dress on your back, and I will sleep very well that night. That evening, they prepared her the way one prepares a sacrifice. There was no time for new gowns, and Lady Fairfax refused to waste Rosalind's on her. So Beatrice was put into an old gray traveling dress, 2 seasons out of fashion, the hem let down in a hurry. Her dark hair, the one thing about herself she had ever secretly liked, was scraped back and pinned so tightly her eyes watered. No point dressing up a plain thing, Lady Fairfax said. Let him see honest goods. Rosalind watched from the doorway, arms folded, unable to decide whether to gloat or sulk. In the end, she chose to laugh. Poor Beatrice. He'll take one look at you and send you home by supper. Perhaps he will, Beatrice thought, and perhaps that would be a mercy. She climbed into the carriage before dawn, alone. No mother to see her off, no sister to wave, just the driver, the cold, and the long gray road north. For 6 hours she rehearsed the truth. She would say it at once before the lie could take root. Your Grace, I must tell you honestly, there has been a deception. I am not the sister you were promised. I am the other one, the wrong one. He would be angry. He would send her back. And whatever waited for her at home after that, she would survive it. She had survived everything else. The carriage passed through iron gates taller than her father's house. Ashworth Hall rose up out of the autumn mist, vast and gray and silent, with 100 dark windows that seemed to watch her come. The carriage stopped, the door opened, and at the top of the stone steps stood a man she knew at once must be the Duke, tall, dark-haired, and utterly still, watching her with an expression she could not read at all. Beatrice gathered every scrap of courage she had left, stepped down onto the gravel, and opened her mouth to confess. "Your Grace, I must tell you the truth. There has been a mistake. I am not." "You must be tired from the journey," the Duke said. That was all. No shock, no anger, no questions. He simply turned to the butler and said, "Her rooms are ready. See that a fire is lit." Then he looked back at Beatrice, one long, quiet look that seemed, impossibly, to hold no surprise in it whatsoever. "Welcome to Ashworth Hall, Miss Fairfax," he said. "We dine at 7. And he walked into the house, leaving Beatrice standing on the gravel with her heart pounding, and a single, terrifying thought taking shape in her mind. He didn't ask which sister I was. Why didn't he ask? Dinner at Ashworth Hall was served at a table long enough to seat 30 people. There were 2. The Duke of Ashworth sat at the head, and Beatrice had been placed, not at the far end as she expected, but directly at his right hand, close enough to see the small scar above his left eyebrow, close enough that there was nowhere to hide. She had spent the afternoon in her rooms rehearsing her confession all over again. The rooms themselves had nearly undone her. They were beautiful, warm, quiet, with a fire already burning and a view of the gardens, and someone had placed fresh lavender on the writing desk. Beatrice had stood in the middle of all that comfort feeling like a thief. None of this is meant for me. It's meant for the sister they promised him. Now, with the soup untouched in front of her, she tried again. "Your Grace, this morning I attempted to tell you something, and I must. Do you not care for the soup?" Beatrice blinked. The soup is lovely, Your Grace, but I must speak plainly. Before the contract is signed, before the banns are read, there is something you must know about me, about my family, about. You prefer coffee to tea." It was not a question. Beatrice stopped, thrown entirely off course. "I beg your pardon. This afternoon, Mrs. Hobbs brought tea to your rooms and the tray came back untouched." The Duke did not look up from his plate. "Most ladies drink tea whether they want it or not because it is expected. You did not, which means you either dislike tea or you dislike pretending. I find myself hoping it is both." Beatrice sat very still. In 8 years, 8 years of running her stepmother's household, of eating alone by the kitchen, of being talked past and looked through, she could not remember the last time anyone had noticed what she did or did not drink. This man had known her for 5 hours. She said, "Coffee, yes, my father drank it. Everyone else found it too bitter, so after he died, it made the mornings feel less." She stopped herself. "Forgive me, that is hardly worth your Grace's attention." The Duke looked at her then. He had gray eyes, dark as the November sky outside, and they rested on her with a steadiness that was almost unnerving. "You were saying something about your family," he said. "Something I must know." "Now say it now." "Yes." Her hands tightened in her lap. "Your Grace, the letter you sent, the offer of marriage, it was addressed to the daughter of the late Baron Fairfax. My family made an arrangement. The sister you were meant to receive, the one everyone intended for you, she is not the one sitting at this table. I am the eldest, the other one. You were deceived, and I will not begin whatever this is with a lie. If you wish to send me back, I will understand completely, and I will go tonight." There, it was done. Beatrice let out a breath and waited for the anger. The Duke of Ashworth finished his wine without hurry. He set the glass down, and he said, "The east wing is closed this time of year. The floors are being repaired. I would ask you not to walk there, the boards are unsafe. Everywhere else, the house is yours to explore as you please. The library is at the end of the south corridor. It was my grandfather's pride. It is currently the loneliest room in England." Beatrice stared at him. "Your Grace, did you hear what I just told you?" "Every word." "Then forgive me, but have you nothing to say to it?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "You dislike pretending," he said. "So do I. When there is something worth saying, Miss Fairfax, I promise you will hear it." He rose from his chair and gave her a short, formal bow. "Good night. Breakfast is at 8. I will tell Mrs. Hobbs to make coffee." And he was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving Beatrice alone at a table set for 30, more confused than she had ever been in her life. He heard me confess. He heard me say the words, "You were deceived." And he answered with a library. Sleep would not come. Beatrice lay in the beautiful room in the beautiful bed and turned it over and over in her mind. He was not a fool. 5 minutes in his company made that plain. He was not deaf, and he was certainly not the kind of man who failed to notice things. He had noticed the *T*. So there were only 2 possibilities. Either the Duke of Ashworth did not care which sister he married, a stranger was a stranger, and a contract was a contract. Or he already knew. But he could not know. He has never met me. He has never met either of us. Rosalind said so herself. He never comes to town, never dances, never calls on anyone *. Round and round it went, until the clock downstairs struck 2, and Beatrice gave up on sleep entirely. She lit a candle, wrapped a shawl over her nightgown, and did the thing she had done on every sleepless night of her life. She went looking for a book. The library was exactly where he said it would be, at the end of the south corridor, and it was not a room, it was a cathedral. Shelves rose 2 stories high into the darkness. Her candle caught the gold lettering of 1,000 spines, and Beatrice stood in the doorway with her heart aching in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The loneliest room in England, * he had called it. She stepped inside. She was reaching for a worn copy of * Robinson Crusoe. Her father had read it to her, 100 years ago, in another life, when her candlelight fell on the small table beside the great armchair by the fire. There was a book lying there, recently read, a ribbon marking its place. Robinson Crusoe. Beatrice stood frozen, her hand still outstretched, a strange feeling climbing the back of her neck. Of all the 1,000 books in this room, she shook herself. A coincidence. It is a famous book. Half of England has read it. But as she turned to go, the candle threw its light across the armchair itself, and she saw that the seat cushion was worn, the leather on the left armrest rubbed pale with use, and on the floor beside it lay a second book, and a third in a small leaning tower. The loneliest room in England was the most lived-in room in the house. He sits here, she thought, every night, alone. A man with 40,000 a year and 100 rooms, and he sits here by himself with. Couldn't sleep. Beatrice nearly dropped the candle. The Duke stood in the doorway, still dressed, a decanter of brandy in one hand, watching her with those unreadable gray eyes. How long he had been there she had no idea. "Your Grace, forgive me. You said the house was mine to explore, and I took the liberty." I said it and I meant it. He came in, set the decanter down, and glanced at the shelf where her hand had been a moment before. Something flickered across his face. Crusoe. Yes, my father used to read it to me. I haven't held a copy since he died." She hesitated. "You are reading it as well, I see." "Rereading," the Duke said. "An old habit, from a time in my life when someone—" He stopped. Whatever the end of that sentence was, he folded it away somewhere she could not follow. "It is a good book for people who have been shipwrecked. Take it. It is yours." "I couldn't possibly." "Miss Fairfax." He said her name quietly, and the room seemed to grow very still around it. "In 3 weeks, if the contract stands, everything in this house will be half yours anyway. Let us begin with a book. If the contract stands, Beatrice's pulse jumped. And will it stand, Your Grace, after what I told you at dinner? For a long moment he simply looked at her, her scraped-back hair coming loose from its pins, the shawl clutched around her shoulders, the candle trembling slightly in her hand. And when he answered, his voice was so low she almost missed it. It has never been in danger. He bowed. Good night, Miss Fairfax. She was halfway back down the corridor, the old book pressed against her heart, when she realized what was nagging at her, a small thing, a tiny thing that made no sense at all. At dinner she had confessed to being the wrong sister. She had offered to leave. She had called it a deception. And in all of it, from the moment she stepped out of the carriage to the moment he handed her the book, the Duke of Ashworth had never once asked her name. Not because he was cold, because he already knew it. By the end of her first week at Ashworth Hall, Beatrice had learned 3 things. The first was that the servants did not hate her. This was new. At home, the servants had treated her the way Lady Fairfax trained them to, as something between a poor relation and an unpaid housekeeper. Here, the maids curtsied. The footmen held doors, and Mrs. Hobbs, the housekeeper, had quietly begun leaving a pot of coffee outside her door every morning at 7, strong and black, without ever being asked twice. The second thing she learned was that the Duke worked like a man running from something. He was in his study before dawn. He rode out to the tenant farms in all weather. He answered his own letters, unheard of for a duke, and at night, long after the house went dark, a light still burned at the end of the south corridor, in the loneliest room in England. The third thing she learned by accident. It was Thursday. Beatrice was in the linen room off the great hall. She could not help herself. 8 years of running a household did not disappear in a week, and she had offered to help Mrs. Hobbs sort the winter linens. 2 chambermaids were working on the other side of the tall shelves, and they did not know she was there. All I'm saying is, it's peculiar, one of them was whispering. Sarah heard it from Mr. Finch himself. The marriage papers weren't drawn up last month. They were drawn up in *March. Beatrice's hands went still on the linens. March, the other maid whispered, but he only wrote to the family in October. Why would a man have his lawyers draw up marriage papers 7 months before he asks? That's not the strangest part. Finch says His Grace had the lawyer come up from London twice *. The first contract came back and His Grace burned it, made him write it out fresh, said there was an error in it. What sort of error? Finch didn't say, but Annie was serving brandy in the study that night and she swears. The maid's voice dropped so low Beatrice had to strain to hear it. She swears she heard His Grace tell the lawyer, "The name is wrong." A door opened somewhere. The maids scattered like sparrows, and Beatrice was left standing alone among the linens, her heart beating strangely. The name is wrong. They had all assumed, everyone had assumed, that the Duke's letter meant Rosalind, the beautiful sister, the known sister, the only Fairfax daughter the world had ever heard of. But what if the error in the first contract was Rosalind's name? It was madness. She knew it was madness, and yet the thought followed her all day like a shadow, through the halls, through dinner, where the Duke was quieter than usual, watching her in that way he had, as if she were a letter he was halfway through reading. And it followed her into Friday morning, when Mrs. Hobbs knocked on her door with a question about the household accounts. His Grace said you're to be given anything you ask for, miss, and the truth is the accounts have been in a sorry state since the old steward retired. I wouldn't trouble you, only you mentioned you'd kept books before, and— I'd be glad to, Beatrice said too quickly, and she meant it. Numbers were honest. Numbers made sense. Numbers did not look at you across a dinner table with unreadable gray eyes. The ledgers are in His Grace's study, Mrs. Hobbs said. He's ridden out to the North Farms, won't be back before dark. He said you're to go in whenever you please." The study smelled of ink and leather and wood smoke. Beatrice found the ledgers exactly where Mrs. Hobbs said they would be, on the long table beneath the window, and for 2 peaceful hours she lost herself in columns of figures, in the tidy arithmetic of hay and timber and wages. It was when she reached for a fresh sheet of blotting paper that she saw it. His desk stood at the far end of the room, and it was not tidy. It was the desk of a man who worked too much. Letters in stacks, a dish of broken sealing wax, an abandoned cup of coffee. And there, on the corner nearest her, lay a document of heavy cream paper, several pages thick, its red seal already broken. At the top of the first page, in a clerk's careful hand, were the words, "Articles of Marriage." Beatrice knew she should not look. She looked. Between His Grace Julian Alexander Cavendish, 6th Duke of Ashworth, and her own name, Miss Beatrice Anne Fairfax, eldest daughter of the late Baron Fairfax. Beatrice. Not the daughter of the late Baron Fairfax. Not Rosalind. Beatrice Anne, her full name, her middle name, a name so unused, so forgotten that she doubted her own stepmother could have produced it if asked. And beside it, the date the contract had been drawn. The 14th of March. 7 months before the letter. 7 months before the mistake. 7 months before her stepmother's cold, calculating smile. It does not say which one, before the gray traveling dress, before the long road north, before any of it. They had not tricked the Duke of Ashworth. They had done exactly what he wanted them to do. The room tilted. Beatrice gripped the edge of the desk, her thoughts flying apart and reassembling into something enormous and impossible. The letter was a trap. He wrote it vaguely on purpose. He knew what they would do, he counted on what they would do. He dangled a fortune in front of Lady Fairfax and let her believe she was cheating him, when all along. "You found the ledgers, I see." Beatrice spun around. The Duke stood in the doorway, still in his riding coat, mud on his boots, rain in his dark hair. Back early. His eyes went from her face to the desk, to the cream-colored pages lying open beside her hand. Nothing in his expression changed. That was the terrifying thing about him. Nothing ever changed, and yet she felt the air in the room shift, the way it does before a storm breaks. "Your Grace," her voice came out steadier than she expected. "What is this?" "It appears to be a marriage contract. It has my name on it. That is customary in a marriage contract. It is dated *March*. She lifted the page, her hand trembling now, holding it between them like evidence in a courtroom. "You wrote to my family in October. You offered for the daughter of Baron Fairfax and let them believe, you let everyone believe, and all along this paper with my name, my full name, a name you could not possibly know." She stopped, because the enormity of it closed her throat. "Who are you? How do you know me?" "Before I stepped out of that carriage, Your Grace, had we ever—" "Beatrice." It was the first time he had ever used her Christian name. He said it quietly, the way a man says a word he has been keeping in a locked drawer for a very long time. And then the Duke of Ashworth crossed the room, and gently, so gently it undid her more than any anger could have, took the contract from her hand, squared its pages, and closed it into the drawer of his desk. "You are owed the truth," he said, "all of it, and I give you my word that you will have it." "Then give it to me now." "No." "Why?" For one moment, one unguarded moment, something surfaced in those gray eyes, and Beatrice was stunned to see what it was. Not coldness, not calculation. Fear. "Because the truth is 12 years old," the Duke said quietly, "and I have carried it alone the whole way. And because when I finally tell you, I need you to believe me, and you would not yet. You cannot possibly know what I would believe." I know that a week ago you stood on my doorstep and called yourself the wrong sister asterisk. His voice never rose, but every word landed like a stone in still water. You have been taught your whole life that no one would ever choose you, that anyone who claimed to would be lying or mad or mistaken. Tell me I am wrong. Beatrice opened her mouth. Nothing came out. So no, he said, softer now. Not yet. Ask me anything else and I will answer it, but not that. He bowed that short, formal bow and walked out, leaving the ledgers, the desk, and Beatrice standing in the middle of the study with her pulse roaring in her ears. 12 years, she thought numbly. 12 years ago I was 14 years old. I had never left my father's land. I knew no one. There was no one to know. The whole world forgot I existed. And then out of nowhere, a memory rose, small and uninvited, like a splinter working its way to the surface. Autumn, the smell of hay, her father still alive, and in the old shepherd's cottage at the far edge of the estate, behind a door she had been forbidden to open. A stranger. Beatrice sat down slowly in the Duke's chair, her hand over her mouth. No asterisk, she thought, it couldn't be. The memory would not come. For 3 days, Beatrice chased it through the corridors of her own mind. Autumn, the smell of hay, the shepherd's cottage at the edge of her father's land, and a door she had been forbidden to open. She had been 14. It was the year before her father died, the last good year, and the harder she reached for it, the more it slipped away, like a dream in the morning. She remembered her father's voice. You're not to go down to the old cottage, Bea, not for a few weeks, promise me. She remembered promising. She did not remember whether she had kept the promise. Twice she nearly asked the Duke outright. Twice she stopped herself, because he had asked her to wait, and because something in her, some new and fragile thing, wanted to solve him the way she solved a column of figures, on her own and honestly. Besides, the days had grown strangely good. That was the only word for it. The Duke Julian asterisk, she had begun to call him in the privacy of her own head and scolded herself every time, had taken to joining her for breakfast. He drank her coffee, declared it dreadful, and drank it again the next morning. He asked her opinion on the tenant accounts and then, unlike any man she had ever known, listened to the answer. In the evenings there was the library, and 2 armchairs now instead of 1, and long silences that were somehow fuller than most conversations she'd ever had. She was not foolish enough to call it happiness, but it was the nearest thing to it she could remember. Which is precisely when the carriage arrived. Beatrice heard it from the morning room, wheels on gravel, too fast, driven by someone in a temper. She reached the great hall just as the footman opened the doors, and the November wind blew in her past, her present, and every bad memory she owned. Lady Fairfax swept into Ashworth Hall as if she were reclaiming stolen property, and one step behind her, in traveling clothes of dove gray, her golden hair arranged into artful despair, her eyes rimmed becomingly pink. Rosalind. Beatrice, darling. Lady Fairfax's voice rang across the marble like a bell with a crack in it. Thank heaven, we came the moment we could. What a asterisk dreadful misunderstanding this has all been. Beatrice stood very still. Ma'am, Rosalind, what are you doing here? Doing here? My dear girl, we've come to rescue asterisk you. Her stepmother peeled off her gloves, finger by finger, taking inventory of the hall as she did, the paintings, the silver, the sheer height of the ceilings. Beatrice watched her do the arithmetic. The whole arrangement was a muddle from beginning to end. The wrong trunk packed, the wrong daughter sent, servants' errors entirely, and you, poor selfless creature, too dutiful to complain. Well, it is all going to be put right. Put right, Beatrice repeated. Rosalind has come to take her proper place. Lady Fairfax smiled her pleasant, terrible smile. And you may come home. Home, the word landed like a slap. The little room beside the kitchen. Supper alone. pencil in the ledgers because ink felt too much like drowning. Beatrice looked at her sister and understood the rest instantly, the way one understands the end of a story one has read before. "Where is the lieutenant?" Rosalind's chin trembled, and for a moment the artful despair became real despair, which was somehow worse. "Edward has taken a posting abroad," she said stiffly. "It transpires that his affections were exaggerated. He learned there was no money," Beatrice translated silently, "and he ran." She was surprised to feel, beneath 8 years of resentment, one small, unwanted stab of pity. Rosalind had been raised as a prize pig is raised, adored, adorned, and never once taught what to do when the fair is over. "I'm sorry," Beatrice said quietly and meant it. "Keep your sorrow," Rosalind's eyes flashed. "You're standing in my house." "As it happens," said a voice from the staircase, "she is standing in mine." Every head turned. Julian came down the stairs unhurried, in his riding coat, and Beatrice watched her stepmother and sister rearrange their faces, watched Lady Fairfax deploy her deepest curtsy, watched Rosalind tilt her chin to the angle that had slain half the officers in the county. "Your Grace," Lady Fairfax rose from the curtsy glowing with purpose. "I am Lady Fairfax. May I present my daughter, my true daughter, the one intended for you from the very first, Miss Rosalind Fairfax." "An honor, Your Grace." Rosalind's voice was music. "Though I confess I feel we know one another already. All the way north I could not stop thinking of how you must have suffered through this comedy of errors. To be promised one thing and sent." Her gaze flicked to Beatrice up and down, one practiced stroke of contempt. Another. The hall went quiet. Julian reached the bottom of the stairs. He looked at Rosalind for a long moment with an attention that made her visibly bloom. She mistook it, Beatrice realized, for admiration. It was not admiration. It was a man confirming a suspicion. "You've had a long journey," Julian said at last, courteous and cool. "You'll want refreshment. Mrs. Hobbs, tea for our guests in the blue drawing room." Lady Fairfax beamed and pressed her advantage. "Your Grace is graciousness itself, and might I suggest, once we are rested, that our men of business meet. The contract will want amending, of course. A simple exchange of names. These things are easily mended when both parties are sensible. Asterisk." She laughed lightly. "You'll find you have gained by the error, I assure you." Rosalind was the toast of her season, accomplished, celebrated, everything a duchess ought to be. Whereas Beatrice, bless her, was never intended for display. Beatrice had heard 1,000 versions of that sentence in her life. She had learned to let them pass through her like weather. But she had never heard one land in front of Julian. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He simply turned his gray eyes on Lady Fairfax, and the temperature of the hall dropped by degrees. "Let me be plain, madam, so that this subject need never be raised again under my roof." Each word was placed like a stone on a grave. "There was no error. There is nothing to mend. The contract names the woman I intend to marry, and she is presently standing in this hall. There was no mistake." He paused. "And there will be no trade." The silence that followed had a texture to it. Rosalind's mouth had fallen slightly open. Beatrice suspected no man had ever looked past her before, and she was experiencing it the way one experiences ice water. Lady Fairfax recovered faster. She always did. "Your Grace has a kind heart," she said smoothly, "and I see he is too honorable to shame my stepdaughter by admitting the truth of his disappointment. Very well, we shall speak of it no more for now." Her smile sharpened at the edges. "But you'll permit family to remain nearby, of course, in this joyful season. A wedding wants family. We should be delighted to accept your hospitality." It was gracefully done, Beatrice had to admit. Refusing them now would look like cruelty, the Duke turning 2 gentlewomen out into the November roads. Lady Fairfax had wagered on his manners the way she wagered on everything, coldly and well. Julian's jaw tightened a fraction. The east wing is closed for repairs. The rooms in the north corridor will be prepared for you. He inclined his head exactly 1 inch. Madam, Miss Fairfax. And he walked out toward the stables, leaving Lady Fairfax victorious in the middle of the marble floor. That night Beatrice could not settle. She told herself it was nothing, 2 unwelcome guests, a few weeks, and then a wedding, and then they would be gone. Julian had stood in front of the whole hall and chosen her. There was no mistake. There will be no trade. The words kept lighting up in her chest like a lamp. But 8 years in that woman's house had taught Beatrice the difference between defeat and retreat, and what she had seen in her stepmother's eyes was not defeat. Past midnight, on her way down to the library, sleep was hopeless. She heard voices through the door of the north corridor sitting room. Low voices. She should not have stopped. She stopped. Humiliated me in front of the servants, Mama. I won't stay here to watch her *crowned. You will stay and you will smile. Lady Fairfax's voice, stripped of all its drawing-room silk, hard as a coal scuttle. Look around you, girl. Look at what is 3 weeks from slipping through our fingers. There is time yet. Time for what? You heard him. He's made his choice. God knows why. She's nothing. She's *furniture*. Men do not change their minds, Lady Fairfax said softly, but they can be made to change their facts. A pause, then Rosalind, slower, interested despite herself. What does that mean? Floorboards creaked, skirts rustled, and her stepmother's voice dropped so low that Beatrice, frozen in the dark corridor with her candle shaking, caught only fragments through the door. Before your father died, papers, if the Duke knew what she truly is. Then, terribly clearly, the sound of Lady Fairfax laughing, the real laugh, the one from behind closed doors, the one Beatrice had spent her whole childhood learning to fear. Trust me, my love, we did not come here to take the bride away from the wedding. Then what did we come for? To take the wedding away from the bride. Chapter 5 Sabotage. The war began quietly, the way Lady Fairfax's wars always did. On Monday, the Duke's grandmother's brooch disappeared. It was Rosalind who raised the alarm, Rosalind who had been shown the family jewels by a flattered maid, Rosalind who cried out at breakfast that the sapphire brooch, the brooch, the one the 4th Duchess wore in the portrait on the stairs, was missing from its case. And it was Lady Fairfax who suggested, with magnificent reluctance, that perhaps the servants' rooms ought to be searched. And the family's rooms too, of course, she added, laying her hand over her heart. All of us, fairness above everything, we must all be beyond suspicion in a house like this. The search was made, and the brooch was found wrapped in a handkerchief, tucked beneath the mattress in Beatrice's room. Beatrice stood in the doorway while Mrs. Hobbs lifted it out, and the world went white at the edges. She had seen this trick before, a missing thimble planted on a maid Lady Fairfax wanted dismissed, a lost coin found in the pocket of a stable boy who had been impertinent. She knew exactly how it worked. Knowing did not stop her hands from shaking. Oh, Beatrice Lady Fairfax's voice was soft with sorrow, pitched to carry to every servant in the corridor. Oh, my dear girl, I had so hoped you'd outgrown this. I have never touched that brooch. Of course, dearest, of course you haven't. Her stepmother turned to Mrs. Hobbs with a small, brave, suffering smile that said everything a court of law could never prove. We won't speak of it again. Families protect their own. It was masterful. No accusation to deny, no charge to answer, just a seed planted in front of witnesses, watered with mercy. Beatrice waited for the summons to the study, waited to stand before Julian and defend herself. It never came. Instead, that evening at dinner, Julian looked at her across the table and said, in front of everyone, "Mrs. Hobbs tells me the clasp on my grandmother's brooch is broken. Odd, it was sound when I put it away in the case myself, on Sunday night." He took a sip of wine. "After the jewels were viewed, I find I sleep better knowing exactly where the valuable things in this house are." He said it mildly to no one at all. Lady Fairfax's smile stayed perfectly in place, but her knuckles around her fork went briefly white. He saw through it. Beatrice thought, weak with relief. He sees through all of it. She thought that meant she was safe. She had not yet understood that she was not the target. The dinner for the county was Rosalind's idea, proposed sweetly, publicly, impossible to refuse. "The neighborhood will want to meet the future Duchess, Your Grace. People talk so when things are kept hidden. Secrecy breeds stories." And so on Saturday, Ashworth Hall lit its windows for the first time in a decade. 12 families, the Lord Lieutenant, a bishop, Beatrice, who had never in her life been to a dinner of more than 8 people, because she had never been invited, not even to her own family's table, spent the week quietly terrified and secretly, foolishly hopeful. Because there was a gown. Julian had sent to York for it. She was not supposed to know, but Mrs. Hobbs told her anyway, glowing. Deep blue silk, the color of the sapphire brooch, the color of ink. The first beautiful thing that had ever belonged to her. When she tried it on, the seamstress held up the glass, and Beatrice looked at the woman reflected there and did not recognize her, and had to pretend the tears were about the pins. On Saturday evening, 1 hour before the guests arrived, she went up to dress. The gown lay on her bed where the maid had left it, and down the whole length of the skirt from waist to hem gaped a long, savage tear, not a snag, not an accident but a cut, made with scissors and moved by hate. India ink had been poured across the bodice. The blue silk had drunk it black. Beatrice stood over the ruin of the first beautiful thing she had ever owned, and she did not cry. That frightened her more than crying would have. She simply stood there, hollowed out, while below her window the first carriages came crunching up the drive. The door opened behind her. She knew the perfume before she turned. "Oh dear," said Lady Fairfax placidly, surveying the wreckage. "How tragic, and no time at all to mend it. Well, you shall simply have to be unwell tonight. A headache. I'll make your excuses, I'm rather good at them." She moved to the window and looked down at the arriving gentry, and her voice, when it came again, had dropped its performance entirely. It was almost kind. That was the horror of it. "Let me tell you what happens now, Beatrice, because unlike everyone else in this house, I have never once lied to you about what you are. Tonight you stay in this room, and in the days after you will begin to understand your situation. The brooch was a lesson. The gown was a lesson. Here is the last one, and it is free." She turned. "I have in my possession a paper concerning your birth. Yours, my dear, not Rosalind's. A paper your poor father spent a great deal of effort to bury, and which I have spent 8 years keeping safe for a rainy day. If you stand beside that man in a church, I will see that every bishop, every magistrate, and every scandal sheet in England reads it. They will not ruin you. You were never high enough to fall. They will ruin him. His name, his mother's name, everything he has spent 12 years rebuilding. Dukes have been dragged through the courts for less." "You're lying," Beatrice whispered. "There is no paper." "Perhaps," Lady Fairfax smiled. "Ask yourself whether he can afford for you to be wrong. You claim to care for him. Oh, don't look so startled. You've gone transparent as glass, girl, you always were. Then do what caring people do." She walked to the door and paused, her hand on the latch, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Disappear." Beatrice did not go down to dinner. Through the floorboards all evening came music and laughter and the bright clatter of silver, the sound of a world with no place in it for her. Twice someone knocked. Twice she said she was unwell. The second time the voice through the door was Julian's, low and careful. "Beatrice, whatever has happened, open the door." She pressed her hand flat against the wood, 1 inch of oak between them, and closed her eyes and said, "Please give my apologies to your guests, Your Grace." A long silence, then his footsteps going away. "It is better this way," she told herself over and over, while she pulled her old gray traveling dress from the bottom of the wardrobe, the one they had sent her north in, the one that fit the person she had apparently never stopped being. "He built something out of ruins, and I will not be the reason it falls. She'll follow me. She has what she wants if I go, she only needs me gone. He'll be angry, and then he'll be relieved, and then in a year he'll be someone's happy husband, and I." She packed the way she did everything, quickly, neatly, and without permitting herself to feel it. The carpet bag held almost nothing. 8 years in her stepmother's house, 3 weeks in his, and everything she owned in the world still fit in one hand. At the last moment, hating herself, unable to stop, she took Robinson Crusoe from the nightstand and put it in the bag. He said it was mine, just this, just one thing. The house was dark and sleeping when she eased open her door. Julian was leaning against the wall of the corridor, directly opposite, arms crossed, fully dressed, as if he had been standing there for hours. As if he had known. Beatrice froze, the carpet bag betraying her in her hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She waited for anger, braced for it. What she saw in his face was worse. It was calm. The desperate, held-together calm of a man watching the thing he feared most walk toward him in slippers and an old gray dress. "I couldn't sleep," Julian said quietly. "I find I never can, on nights when history tries to repeat itself." "Your Grace." "She got to you. It wasn't a question. I don't know what she used yet, I will, but I know the shape of it. It will have been dressed up as protecting me. That is the only lever in the world that moves you, Beatrice. She's had 3 weeks to find it, and she is nothing if not thorough." "Please," her voice broke on the word, "please don't make this harder. If you knew what staying would cost you." "Cost asterisk me asterisk." Something flared behind the gray at last, 12 years of it. He crossed the corridor slowly and stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see he had not slept, perhaps not for days. "You are about to walk out of my house in the middle of the night in November to save me. So I am asking you this once to stand still for 1 minute first. 1 minute. Then, if you still choose the door, I'll have the carriage brought around myself. You will not walk to the village in the dark. Even runaways deserve warm feet." Despite everything, the ruined gown, the wreckage of the whole night, a laugh escaped her, half a sob. 1 minute for what? Julian reached into his coat. What he took out was not a document, not money, none of the weapons of powerful men. It was a letter, unsealed, ancient, soft and gray along the folds, as if it had been opened and refolded 1,000 times, as if it had been carried against a heart for years. He held it out to her, and his hand, his steady, unreadable hand, was not entirely steady. "If you leave," said the Duke of Ashworth, "take this with you." Beatrice looked down. There on the front of the letter, in faded ink, in a hand she did not know, was her own name. And the date in the corner was 12 years old. 12 years ago, they did not stay in the corridor. Julian led her down to the library, where else, and lit the lamps, and put her in the worn armchair by the fire as carefully as if she were made of paper. Then he stepped back, put his hands behind his back like a man awaiting sentencing, and said, "Read it." The letter was soft as cloth from years of folding. Beatrice opened it with hands that would not quite obey her, and tilted it toward the firelight and read. "Miss Beatrice Fairfax, I have started this letter 11 times. I am a coward in only one respect, and you are holding it. You do not know my name. For 5 weeks you knew me only as the man behind the forbidden door, and you never once asked, which, I have since learned, is the rarest form of kindness there is. So before anything else, my name is Julian. I was 20 years old when your father found me half dead in the ditch on the North Road, and I am alive because of two people. One of them buried the secret. The other one read to it. The fire cracked. The words swam. Beatrice looked up. The cottage, she whispered. The shepherd's cottage, the door I wasn't to open. Your father kept his word to me better than my own family ever did, Julian said quietly. He told no one, not your stepmother, not the servants. He was warned there could be trouble in it for him, and he hid me anyway. A pause. He could not have known his 14-year-old daughter poached apples from the orchard by way of the cottage path. And it came back. Not in pieces this time, all at once, a door swinging open 12 years deep. Autumn, the smell of hay and windfall apples, smoke from a chimney that should have been cold. She had peered through the gap in the shutters expecting a tramp and found instead a young man asleep in the narrow bed, his arm splinted, his ribs bound, his face so bruised it was hardly a face at all. And on the floor beside the bed, a book he had evidently tried to hold and dropped. You couldn't hold the book, she heard herself say, dazed, the memory speaking through her. Your arm was broken, both arms, the right one and the left wrist. You'd been thrown, and then the men who robbed you, she stopped, her hand over her mouth. I brought you apples and bread when I could take it without Cook noticing, and I read to you. Through the window at first because I was frightened to come in, and you said, the tears came now absurdly, 12 years late. You said a little louder, if you please, the hero cannot hear you. Robinson Crusoe, Julian said. Chapter 4. You read like the words tasted of something. No one had ever read to me in my life, not my nurse, not my mother. I was the third son of a great house, Beatrice. Third sons are given a horse, a temper, and the family's contempt in that order. He looked into the fire. You asked me once why I was there, and I wouldn't say, so you invented answers. Do you remember what you decided? That you were a prince, Beatrice whispered, fleeing a usurper. I was a boy fleeing his own father. The words came out flat and old, worn smooth like the letter. There had been a quarrel, the kind that ends a family. My father had discovered that my eldest brother's debts were about to disgrace us all, and he needed someone to carry the blame that wasn't the heir. Third sons are also useful for that. I refused, and I said things a 20-year-old says, and I rode out of Ashworth at night meaning never to come back. 15 miles on your father's road, two men with a rope and a club decided my horse was worth more than my skull. They were very nearly right. He crossed to the mantel, and his voice steadied into something quieter. Your father found me at dawn. I begged him, no doctor, no letters, no name. Any word of where I was would have gone straight back to my family, and I would rather have died in that ditch than be dragged home. He should have refused. Any sensible man would have refused. Instead, he set my arm himself. He'd been an army man, your father, did you know? And he told the household the cottage roof was being repaired. And for 5 weeks the only visitors I had in the world were a baron who asked no questions and a girl in the window with a book. Why did you never tell me who you were? Because you'd have curtsied. He said it simply, and it landed in her chest like a stone. You'd have curtsied and called me my Lord Asterisk and stood when I entered, and everything true about those 5 weeks would have died on the spot. You were the first person in my life who was kind to me without knowing what I was worth. Do you understand what that is to a man raised as currency? He turned from the mantel. Then I healed. And your father came to me one evening and said the word had come from Ashworth. My second brother's regiment was posted abroad, and my father required a son to go in his place, and if I did not appear, the search would begin, and it would end at his cottage. So I went. I stood at that window on the last morning and watched you come up the path with your basket, and I let you find the cottage empty. It is the act of my life I am least proud of. You never said goodbye. I wrote it instead. He nodded at the letter in her hands. Read the rest. She read. By the time you hold this, I will be gone, and you will think the stranger ungrateful. He is not. He intends to repay you, and he has taken an inventory of everything he owes. 41 apples, one blue ribbon used as a bookmark and never returned, and the whole of Robinson Crusoe twice. A gentleman settles his debts. This one has nothing yet to settle them with, but he means to have someday, and when he does, he will come back to the girl who read to a stranger and told no one. If she will have him. Wait for the story's end, Miss Fairfax. The castaway gets off the island. J**. The signature was smudged, as if the ink had still been wet when the paper was folded, or as if a thumb had passed over it many hundreds of times across many years. You never sent it, Beatrice said. I had nothing. The letter promises repayment sent from a third son with a soldier's pay. It would have been an insult. So I told myself, next year when I have something, next year. His jaw tightened. Then the fever came through Ashworth the winter I was 25. It took my father in a week. It took both of my brothers in a month. And the boy nobody wanted came home to a dukedom so drowned in his brother's debts that the bailiffs were in the portrait gallery. He exhaled. 12 years, Beatrice. It took 12 years to drag this estate out of the grave. I ended each of them the same way. I took out this letter, and I read my own promise back to myself, and I said, not yet. Not until the name I offer her is worth having. He came and knelt by the armchair then, the Duke of Ashworth, on his knees on his own library floor, so that his eyes were level with hers. Last spring the last debt was paid. I sat down that same evening and had my lawyer draw the contract. He assumed the whole world assumed, and he wrote your sister's name because the world has only ever been told of one Fairfax daughter. I burned it and made him write it again. Then I wrote to your stepmother, and I made the offer vague on the main page, and on the second page, for her eyes alone, I named you, Beatrice Anne, by name twice so there could be no mistake. His voice dropped. I dangled a fortune in front of a greedy woman and let her believe whatever she needed to believe, so long as the right sister was in the carriage. I am not proud of the method. I could not risk the alternative. If she had known what you were worth to me, she would have set the price accordingly. She has traded in you your whole life. I refuse to let you be traded one last time. The second page. The flicker of confusion on her stepmother's face, that gray Tuesday in the hall. It does not say which one, spoken by a woman with the page that said which one folded inside her sleeve. Even the sacrifice had been theater. She had been sent north like a punishment, in a scraped bun and an old gray dress, by a woman who knew, who had always known, that she was sending exactly the bride the Duke demanded. I confess to you, Beatrice said slowly, that first night at dinner, I called myself the wrong sister. I offered to leave, and you sat there and let me believe. I know. For the first time since she had met him, Julian looked ashamed. You stood in my hall, thin as a rail, in a dress they punished you with, and you apologized to me for existing. If I had told you the truth that night, I have loved you since I was 20. I built all of this to be worthy of a girl in a window. Tell me honestly, what would you have done? Beatrice opened her mouth. You'd have run, he said gently. You'd have decided it was a madman's fancy or a cruel joke or a mistake, soon regretted anything at all except the truth, because they spent 26 years teaching you the truth was impossible. So I waited. I gave you coffee and ledgers and a library and time. I let you learn me the way you learn anything, slowly and on evidence. The ghost of a smile. You are a bookkeeper, Beatrice. I have been balancing my account. The fire had burned low. Somewhere above them the great house lay sleeping, and in it her stepmother and her sister, and a carpet bag still packed by the door of her room. The clock said 4 in the morning. The letter said 12 years. I didn't ask for the beautiful sister, Julian said. I asked for the one who read to a stranger and told no one. There was never a wrong sister. There was only ever you. Beatrice looked down at the letter, at the smudged *J*, at the ribbon crease worn pale, and then at the man kneeling on the floor beside her chair, holding out no ring, no demand, nothing but 12 years of patience and an open hand. She put her hand in his. "The castaway gets off the island," she whispered. Neither of them saw, through the crack of the library door, the pale figure standing motionless in the dark corridor, a figure that had followed the light downstairs and heard every word, and was already silently climbing back up the stairs to wake her mother. Rosalind had come looking for a glass of water. She was returning with a war. Beatrice told him everything the next morning. They walked out along the frost-white terrace after breakfast, and she laid it all before him the way she laid out figures in a ledger, the brooch, the gown, and finally the thing her stepmother had said in the ruined blue silence of her room, a paper concerning your birth. Your poor father spent a great deal of effort to bury it. Stand beside that man in a church, and every scandal sheet in England reads it. Julian listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Do you believe it exists?" he asked. "This paper?" "I believe something exists," Beatrice said slowly. "She lies the way other people breathe, but she never bluffs without a card. It's not her way, and there are things," she hesitated. "Julian, my father never spoke of my mother, not once in my whole life. Her portrait was taken down before I was old enough to remember it hanging. When I asked, he would only say she was the best of women and leave the room. I always thought it was grief." Her voice dropped. "What if it was something else?" "Then it changes nothing." "It changes everything, asterisk. If I am not what the contract says I am, if there is scandal in my blood, she isn't wrong about what it would cost you. The courts, the College of Heralds, the papers." "Beatrice." He stopped walking and turned her gently to face him. 12 years ago, a man with no name lay in a cottage, and a girl decided he was worth apples and Robinson Crusoe without asking for his pedigree. You set the family custom. I am merely observing it. The gray eyes held hers, steady as a handshake. "Whatever is on that paper, if there is a paper, we will read it in daylight together, and it will be one more thing we know. That is all a secret is once it's out. A thing you know. It is only a weapon while it lives in her sleeve. She'll use it before the wedding. She has nothing to gain by waiting." "I know." Something cooled and sharpened in his face, the look, she now understood, of a man who had spent 12 years across negotiating tables from bankers who wanted to bury him. "So let me tell you how the next 3 weeks will go. You are going to plan a wedding. I am going to write some letters. And your stepmother is going to discover that she has spent her whole life playing cards against children, and that she is now at a table with a grown man." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her gloved knuckles, and his voice softened all the way through. "Leave her to me. Can you do that? After 26 years of facing everything alone, can you let it be my turn?" Beatrice looked at him, and did the bravest thing she had ever done. Braver than the confession at dinner, braver than the midnight corridor. She said yes. And so came the weeks that Beatrice would keep, all her life, in the place where other people kept their jewels. The banns were read that Sunday in the little stone church at Ashworth Village. Julian Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Ashworth, and Beatrice Anne Fairfax, spinster of this parish, and half the county turned in their pews to look at her, and for once in her life, Beatrice did not want to disappear. Mrs. Hobbs wept into her prayer book. The seamstress came back from York with more blue silk, and a mouth full of pins and vengeance, muttering that this one would be sewn with double thread and locked in the housekeeper's own wardrobe. Let them bring their scissors now. There was a morning when Julian taught her to ride the gentlest mare in the stable, both of them laughing at her terror, his hand never leaving the bridle. There was an evening when she found the great ballroom lit for no reason at all, every candle burning, the covers off the chandeliers, and Julian standing alone in the middle of the shining floor. "I'm told you were never given a season," he said. "Never given a ball. 26 years old, and no one has ever danced with you. Julian, there's no music. You read to a man through a window for 5 weeks, said the Duke of Ashworth, holding out his hand. I think we can manage a waltz without an orchestra. They managed it. Badly, then less badly, then, for the length of one long turn down the empty golden room, not badly at all. Her head came to rest, somewhere in the third circuit, against his shoulder, and Beatrice heard him murmur into her hair, so quietly she was never entirely sure of it afterward. 41 apples, 1 blue ribbon, I told you I settle my debts. If lives could be stopped like clocks, she would have stopped hers there. Through all of it the North Corridor stayed strangely, terribly quiet. Lady Fairfax appeared at dinner, smiling, complimenting the soup. Rosalind barely appeared at all, pale, silent, watchful, her golden prettiness gone somehow waxen, like fruit kept too long in a bowl. Beatrice caught her once on the stairs, looking down at the wedding preparations in the hall below with an expression that was not envy at all, but something closer to dread, and for one strange moment their eyes met, and Beatrice could have sworn her sister was about to speak. Then Lady Fairfax's voice floated up from the landing, "Rosalind, darling," and Rosalind flinched like a struck dog and was gone. She knows what's coming, Beatrice thought, with a chill she couldn't reason away. Whatever it is, she knows. It came on a Thursday, 8 days before the wedding. A private word, Your Grace, on a matter of family. Lady Fairfax closed the study door behind her with her own hand. Julian did not rise from behind the desk, and did not offer her a chair. She took one anyway, arranging her skirts with the unhurried calm of a woman holding 4 aces, and laid a folded document on the leather between them. I'll be brief, for we are both busy people. You are 8 days from marrying, she paused delicately, the eldest daughter of the late Baron Fairfax, except, Your Grace, that you are not, because no such person exists. Julian looked at the document. He did not touch it. Open it, said Lady Fairfax pleasantly. You'll find a sworn record, witnessed and dated, concerning the birth of the girl called Beatrice. Her mother, you'll see, was not the first Lady Fairfax, who was barren as a stone, poor creature. Her mother was a servant in my late husband's household, and there was no marriage, Your Grace, whatever the parish register was later persuaded to say. The child was smuggled into the nursery, and a lie was smuggled into the record, and my husband spent the rest of his life and a good deal of his fortune keeping it buried. He confessed it to me before he died. Husbands do at the end, and I have kept it safe ever since. She smiled. Out of family feeling. Out of family feeling, Julian repeated without inflection. You see the difficulty. Your contract names the asterisk daughter of Baron Fairfax asterisk. Marry the girl and you marry a servant's natural child under a false name, the contract void, the marriage a fraud, the succession of Ashworth open to challenge by every cousin with a lawyer. And it will come out, Your Grace. These things always come out. Unless, she let the word sit there, warming its hands, unless the family manages it quietly, the banns can be stopped. Grooms fall ill, weddings are postponed and quietly dissolved. The world forgets in a season. You keep your name, I keep my paper buried. The girl is spared the humiliation of public exposure. I do think of her welfare, whatever she may tell you, and since a duke ought not to be left without a bride entirely. She spread her hands modestly. There remains a Fairfax daughter of unimpeachable birth. And if I refuse? Then on the wedding morning this document reaches the Morning Post asterisk, the Lord Chancellor's office and every peer in the county, and instead of a wedding, Your Grace, you will have a trial. I am told the courts take years. Her voice never lost its warmth. You have rebuilt a great deal in 12 years. It would be a pity to spend the next 12 watching it taken apart, over a girl whose own blood tells you she was never worth it. One word to her, by the way, one hint, one warning, one midnight confession in that library you're both so fond of, and I publish at once. I do hope that's understood. Her ignorance is the only thing you're buying. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, faintly, came the sound of hammering the carpenters, building the wedding arch. Julian reached out at last and drew the document toward him. He read it once slowly, all the way through, his face as unreadable as the day Beatrice had first seen him at the top of the steps. Whatever he felt did not reach the surface. But 12 years of contracts had taught his eyes to move through a page the way a surgeon's fingers move through a wound. And somewhere in that careful, silent reading, they stopped. For half a heartbeat, on the witness line, then moved on. "You'll have my answer in a week," he said. "You'll give it to me in 3 days." Lady Fairfax rose, victory sitting on her like a fur. "Weddings are so difficult to stop at the last moment. Good morning, Your Grace. I'll see myself out. I'm quite at home here already." The door clicked shut. Julian sat alone in the study for a long time, the document open on the desk before him, the hammering of the wedding arch echoing faintly through the glass. Then he drew out a sheet of paper and dipped his pen, and began to write fast, in a hand quite unlike his usual careful script. The letter was addressed to a Mr. Nathaniel Grimm, of Lincoln's Inn, London. It began, "Come at once and tell no one. Bring the Fairfax file, all of it, and find me the man who witnessed a certain document 26 years ago. I have 3 days, and I believe I have found a ghost." The change came overnight, and Beatrice felt it before she could name it, the way one feels a window left open somewhere in a warm house. On Friday morning, Julian was not at breakfast. "Estate business," said the footman. On Friday evening he was at dinner but not at the table, present in body, answering in single words, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the candles. When she asked if he was unwell, he said, "Tired, forgive me," and retired early. There was no library that night. For the first time since her arrival at Ashworth Hall, the light at the end of the south corridor stayed dark. On Saturday, a closed carriage arrived from the London road, mud to the axles, and a thin man in black was taken straight through to the study by Julian himself. No introduction, no name offered. The study door was locked from the inside. Trays were left outside it. When Beatrice passed in the corridor that afternoon, she heard the low, urgent murmur of men's voices, and then Julian's, suddenly sharp, in a fragment that stopped her heart between one step and the next. "Then say it plainly. If it is true, the marriage cannot stand as written." The thin man's murmur, a drawer slamming. "No, she can know nothing of this. Nothing, do you understand me? Not until it's finished." Beatrice stood in the corridor with her hand pressed to her mouth, and then made herself walk on, because the alternative was to sink to the floor where the servants would find her. "If it is true, the marriage cannot stand. She can know nothing of this." There were, she told herself that night, staring at the canopy of her beautiful bed, 100 innocent explanations. She lined them up like figures in a column. He had promised her, "We will read it in daylight together." He had waltzed with her in an empty ballroom 11 days ago. Men did not change in 11 days. But the column would not sum, because against it stood the oldest arithmetic she knew, the one that had been written into her before she could read. No one chooses you. Anyone who claims to is lying or mad or mistaken. Julian himself had named it that first week. "Tell me I am wrong," he'd said, and she couldn't. 26 years of proof on one side, 3 weeks of miracle on the other. Miracles, in Beatrice's experience, were simply mistakes that hadn't been discovered yet. On Sunday, the 3rd banns were to be read. Beatrice sat alone in the Ashworth pew, estate business, and when the rector opened his book and asked, as the law required, whether any person knew cause or just impediment why these 2 persons should not be joined together, the silence in the little stone church went on so long, and her stepmother's face 2 rows back was so serene, so patient that Beatrice understood at last, with total clarity, that she was watching a cat sit outside a mouse hole. Lady Fairfax was not going to stop the wedding. She was waiting for Julian to do it. The summons came on Monday, and it was not from Julian. Beatrice found her stepmother established in the blue drawing room, pouring tea for two as if the room, the china, and the girl standing in the doorway all belonged to her. Perhaps, Beatrice thought numbly, they always had. "Sit down, my dear, you look dreadful. Cream," Lady Fairfax poured anyway. "I'll not draw this out. Whatever else you think of me, I have never wasted your time. You've noticed the change in him. Locked doors. A lawyer from London, very discreet, arriving like a funeral. 4 days now without your cozy little evenings in the library. You are many things, Beatrice, but you have never been stupid, so tell me, what does your bookkeeping make of it?" "You went to him," Beatrice said. "You showed him something." "I showed him the truth." Lady Fairfax set down the pot, and with the unhurried ceremony of a woman who has rehearsed a moment for years, drew out a folded document and laid it on the table between them, turned to face Beatrice, like a dish being served. "Your father, God rest him, was a good man," she said, "and like all good men he told one great lie and spent his life gilding it. The first Lady Fairfax, the woman whose grave you put flowers on, girl, was no more your mother than I am. Your mother was Anne Dole, a laundry maid, 17 years old when the Baron got her with child and bought off and buried in the record. There was no marriage. There is no legitimate eldest daughter of Baron Fairfax. There is only you, a servant's natural child, smuggled into a nursery, christened under a lie, and about to carry that lie into a duke's marriage bed and a duke's line of succession." The room had gone very far away. Beatrice heard her own voice from the end of a long corridor. "You're lying. You showed me nothing in October, nothing in November. You invent weapons as you need them." "Read it then." She read it. Sworn witness dated the year of her birth. Her father's name. Anne Dole's servant. The words did not change no matter how many times her eyes went over them, and each pass took something with it, the portrait that had been taken down before she could remember it, her father leaving the room whenever she asked. She was the best of women, the little bedroom by the kitchen, 26 years of being hidden when guests came. Not cruelty, after all. Not only cruelty. "Housekeeping." "He has seen this," Beatrice said. It was not a question any more. "Thursday last." Lady Fairfax's voice gentled into its most dangerous register, the one that sounded like mercy. "And I will give him this much, he did not rage. He read it the way he reads everything twice, like a bill of sale, and then he asked for time. Men always ask for time, dear. It is how they say asterisk yes slowly. The lawyer came Saturday. They are drafting the withdrawal now, quietly, respectably. The wedding will be postponed for his health, then postponed again, and by spring it will simply never have existed. He asked me personally, to remain at the hall until it's managed so that you would have family about you when." She paused exquisitely. "When you are told. He is trying to be kind, Beatrice, in his way. She can know nothing of this until it's finished. Those were his very words. He wishes to spare you the scene." And there it was. His own voice, his own words, heard with her own ears through a study door, handed back to her now with their meaning turned inside out, and fitting perfectly. That was the genius of it. Beatrice would understand much later. Her stepmother had built the lie almost entirely out of true things. "He waltzed with me," she whispered. It was all that was left in the column. There was no music, and he waltzed with the Baron's daughter. Lady Fairfax rose, smoothing her skirts, finished. "That girl no longer exists. What remains is a laundry maid's bibelot sitting in a duchess's chair, and every day you continue to sit in it, you make his ruin more certain and your own humiliation more public. You told me once you cared for him." She moved to the door and delivered the last line the way an executioner delivers the blade, swiftly and almost kindly. "Prove it better than your mother did." Beatrice did not remember climbing the stairs. She remembered afterward only small and terrible clarities. The carpet bag, still holding the shape of its last packing. The gray traveling dress. her hands moving through the drill they knew by heart quickly, neatly, without permitting herself to feel it, while the rain came on outside, first fingertips against the window, then fists. Two things she did not pack. Robinson Crusoe she set gently in the center of the made bed. On top of it, squared to its edges with a bookkeeper's care, she laid the old letter 12 years of folding, the smudged asterisk J, asterisk, 41 apples and 1 blue ribbon, and a promise addressed to a girl who, it turned out, had never legally existed at all. Accounts settled, nothing owing. Beside them she left a single line, in her small, upright hand on Ashworth paper. You asked me once to stand still for 1 minute. Consider it the last thing I will ever refuse you. Do not follow, you were right, all those weeks ago. I was the wrong sister after all. The mistake was only in whose. The house was at dinner. No one saw her go down the servants' stair, through the kitchen garden, out by the orchard gate. No one but a pale figure at an upstairs window of the north corridor, who watched the small gray shape cross the park in the rain and pressed one hand flat against the glass, and did not call out. Rosalind stood there, a long time after the dark had swallowed her sister. Then she turned and looked at her own reflection in the black window, the toast of the season, the beauty, the asterisk true asterisk daughter, and found she could not hold its eye. The village of Ashworth was 3 miles by the road and 2 by the field path, and Beatrice took the road because the fields belonged to him. By the first mile the rain had gone through the gray dress, by the second through everything else. The Rose and Crown took her last coins and gave her a room the size of the one beside her stepmother's kitchen, with a candle stub and a window rattling in its frame, and Beatrice sat down on the narrow bed in her soaked dress, and finally, in the first room she had ever paid for herself, permitted herself to feel it. She did not weep prettily, the way Rosalind did. She wept the way accounts fail all at once, after years of quiet arrears. She was still sitting there, wrung empty, some hours past midnight when a sound rose over the rain, hooves and wheels fast, too fast for the weather coming up the London road. Beatrice lifted her head. Through the streaming glass she saw it pass, a post-chaise, lamps blazing, horses steaming, mud to the windows, making for the hall gates as if the devil kept its schedule. For half a heartbeat, lit by its own lamps, the door panel showed a painted crest, quills and scales, the mark of a London chambers. Lawyers, Beatrice thought dully and looked away. Of course, there is paperwork when a wedding dies. She blew out the candle stub to save it. And so she never saw the second figure in the chaise, beside the thin man in black, an old man, straight-backed despite his years, with a clergyman's collar and a strong-box gripped on his knees. A man who had been 26 years dead to the world. A ghost riding through the rain to Ashworth Hall, carrying in a locked box the one thing Lady Fairfax had never imagined anyone would find. The truth. The post-chaise reached Ashworth Hall a little after 2 in the morning, and the Duke was waiting on the steps in the rain, coatless, as if weather were a thing that happened to other men. Well, was all he said. Mr. Nathaniel Grimm of Lincoln's Inn climbed down first, gray with travel, clutching his dispatch case like a man who had slept handcuffed to it. Found him, your grace, exactly where the pension record said, and neither dead nor senile, whatever the diocese believes. He turned to help down his companion. Though I'll let him tell you himself. He's been rehearsing it for 200 miles. The second man came down slowly, stiff with age and rain, very old, very straight in a clergyman's black, with a face like weathered oak and a small iron strongbox held against his chest as if it were a child. Your Grace. His voice was cracked with years but perfectly clear. Josiah Crane, once rector of St. Anne's-by-the-Moor. I understand, and here the old eyes flashed with something that was not feeble in the least, That someone has been borrowing my signature." They sat in the study, the lamps lit, the storm hammering the glass, and on the desk between them lay two documents, side by side. The first was Lady Fairfax's affidavit, the sworn confession of a dying baron. Anne Dole, servant. No marriage. Witnessed in a firm clerical hand, Josiah Crane, rector of St. Anne's-by-the-Moor. The second was a single line, written by the old man 5 minutes earlier at Julian's request, on Ashworth paper, his own name. Julian had seen it in the first 30 seconds, that Thursday in this room, with Lady Fairfax's perfume still poisoning the air. The small, wrong thing his eye had snagged on, and his face had refused to show. Now he laid his finger between the two signatures so that Grim could see it too. "Crane asterisk," Julian said quietly, "with an E at the end on every parish record this man signed for 40 years, and on her affidavit Crane asterisk. Crain." He looked up. Whoever was paid to copy this hand copied it beautifully, but he copied it from a forger's instruction, not from the man, and a man does not misspell his own name. "It's more than the spelling, Your Grace." The old rector's voice hardened. "It's the date. This paper has me witnessing a deathbed confession at Fairfax Hall in the spring of '99. In the spring of '99 I had been retired from St. Anne's 4 years and was living with my sister in Whitby. I have the letters to prove it, and the diocese has the record." He drew a long breath. "But the true crime, sir, is not what this paper says I witnessed. It is what I did witness 30 years ago, that this paper was built to bury." His hands, spotted with age but steady, went to the strong box, a key from around his neck. The lid came up on a smell of camphor and old paper, and the rector lifted out a slim parish register, its leather scabbed with damp, a green ribbon marking one page. "St. Anne's-by-the-Moor, the 12th of June. Present, myself, the sexton and my housekeeper as witnesses, and 2 young people mad enough to marry for love in a borrowed church at 7 in the morning." He opened the register and turned it toward Julian, and his old finger came down on the entry like a judge's gavel. "Married by license, Henry George Fairfax, Baron Fairfax, bachelor, and Anne Dole, spinster of this parish." 2 signatures beneath, the Baron's bold and looping, and below it, careful and small and proud, a girl's. "She was a schoolmaster's daughter," Crane said softly. "In service, yes, for 2 years, as a lady's companion, which is how he met her, and which is the single true thread your Lady Fairfax wove her lie around. The best lies are darned into truth, Your Grace. You'll know that better than I." His family raged. There were threats of disinheritance, so the young fool married her quietly and meant to announce it when his father cooled. Instead, his father died that winter, and Anne died 14 months later, 3 days after her daughter was born. He never announced anything after that. He locked his grief in a drawer, took down her portrait because he could not walk past it, and let a silence grow that his second wife, in time, learned to farm. The storm flung a fist of rain at the window. Julian was looking at the small, proud signature, and when he spoke his voice had sand in it. "Then Beatrice is the legitimate firstborn daughter of a lawful marriage, baptized by me at that same font 11 days after her poor mother's funeral. It's on the next page if you doubt." The old man's face folded into grief. "I christened her, Your Grace, Beatrice Anne. The Anne was for her mother." Grim cleared his throat and opened the dispatch case. "Which brings us to the last of it, Your Grace, and the worst. The Reverend was not only holding a register. He drew out a packet, sealed, the wax old and brown, the direction written in a hand Julian had seen once before, on a state correspondence in the Fairfax ledgers. The Baron rode to Whitby, alone, 8 months before he died. He gave the Reverend this and an instruction." "He was afraid," Crane said simply. "He did not say of what. He said only, if my daughter Beatrice is ever denied her name, her place, or her due, open this and see her righted. If she never needs it, burn it unread when you hear she is happily settled." The old man's voice cracked at last. "I waited 12 years, your grace, for one letter or the other. None came. I thought, God forgive me, I am old and Whitby is far away. I thought no news was a happy ending." Julian broke the seal. Inside, in the Baron's own hand, his true last will and testament, dated 8 months before his death, properly drawn, properly witnessed by 2 Whitby men whose names Grim was already copying into his notebook. Julian read it once. Then he read one clause of it again, and around the paper his hands went very still, the way the air goes still before the worst of a storm. "The whole of my unentailed property, moneys and effects to my beloved eldest daughter, Beatrice Ann Fairfax, absolutely in her mother's memory, and in poor repayment of a silence she never deserved." 8 years. 8 years of the little room beside the kitchen. 8 years of pencil in the ledgers because ink felt like drowning Beatrice, keeping meticulous books on the slow theft of her own inheritance. Every gown of Rosalind's, every music master, every London season, every candle of the campaign to sell the true daughter high, all of it bought with money that had belonged, every shilling, to the girl eating supper alone by the kitchen. The will Lady Fairfax had never found. The debts that had somehow swallowed a healthy estate. It was not housekeeping, and it had never been housekeeping. It was plunder, patient, smiling, 26-year plunder, and the forged affidavit was simply the last lock on the vault. Because a bastard cannot inherit, and so a bastard can never come asking where her fortune went. "She didn't come here to steal a wedding," Julian said slowly. "She came because for the first time in her life Beatrice was about to have a husband, standing, lawyers of her own." He looked up at Grim and his eyes were terrible. "A duchess can ask questions a poor relation cannot. The marriage was never the threat. I was never the threat. The threat was Beatrice seen at last." He was already rising, already reaching for the bell to wake the house. "She has played this against the wrong man by 3 days, and at 8 o'clock this morning I am going to walk into the blue drawing room and—" The study door opened without a knock. Rosalind stood in it. She was in her nightgown with a shawl dragged round her, her golden hair down and wild, her face the color of the paper on the desk. And she had clearly been standing in the corridor long enough to hear, because she was looking at the register, and the will, and the old clergyman, with the eyes of a person watching their own house burn. "It's true then," she said, "all of it. I used to tell myself I'd imagined." She stopped, swallowed, started again, and her voice came out stripped of every bell-like note it had ever performed. "There's a red dispatch box, under the floorboard beneath her bed here, and at home it travels with her. I saw inside it once when I was 15. Papers and a man's letters from York, a man who copies old hands. Mama called him, and she laughed when she said it, and then she saw me in the doorway and she—" Rosalind's hand went briefly to her own cheek, an old unconscious gesture, and Julian understood in one flash of pity exactly how the toast of the season had been trained. "I never looked again. I never asked again. It was easier being the one she loved. You can't imagine how easy she makes it being the one she—" "Rosalind," Julian's voice was quiet, "why are you telling me this at 3 in the morning?" And Rosalind Fairfax, the beauty, the prize, the true daughter, looked at him with her chin trembling exactly as it had in the hall on the first day, except that this time there was nothing artful in it at all. "Because Beatrice is gone," she said. "She went out through the orchard at dinner time in the rain with the old carpet bag. I watched her from the window and I didn't call out. I've been standing at that window for 6 hours trying to become the kind of person who calls out." Her voice broke. "Her room's empty. There's a book on the bed and a letter, and you'd better come. And your grace, when you find her—" The last words came out in pieces. "Tell her the dress, the blue dress. It wasn't the maid's." The note said, "Do not follow." Julian read it once, standing over the bed where Robinson Crusoe lay squared beneath 12 years of his own handwriting. Every debt returned, every account closed, a whole life balanced to zero and signed off in one small upright line. Then he put the note in his breast pocket, next to where the letter used to live, and went down the stairs 3 at a time, shouting for his horse. Grim appeared in the hall below, aghast, the will still in his hand. "Your Grace, the storm, the roads are rivers, it can wait till first light." She thinks she's nothing again. Julian was already through the doors, into the roar of it, rain like shot against his shoulders, the stable boy running ahead with a lantern. She spent one night believing it. She's not spending two. He swung up into the saddle of the fastest horse he owned, wheeled it toward the gates, and put his heels down. 3 miles away, in a narrow room above the Rose and Crown, Beatrice Fairfax sat awake in the dark, listening to the storm and to something else beneath it growing. Hoofbeats. One rider coming fast. The knock came a little before 4 in the morning, and it was not loud. That was the strange thing, Beatrice thought, standing barefoot on the cold boards with her heart slamming. She had heard the horse come up the village street at a gallop, heard it clatter into the inn yard, heard boots on the stairs taking them 2 at a time. And then, at her door, 3 knocks, quiet as a question. Beatrice. His voice was ruined with rain and hard riding and gentler than she had ever heard it. "I've read your note. I'm not here to argue with it. You wrote that 1 minute was the last thing you would ever refuse me, and I find I never collected. I've come for my minute. Then if you open this door and tell me to ride home, I'll go, and the carriage and every penny you'll ever need will follow you wherever you choose, and no one will trouble you again. But the minute is mine. You put it in writing." Despite everything, the hollowed-out night, the ruin of it all, Beatrice heard herself make a sound that was half sob and half laugh. A bookkeeper to the last. He's calling in the debt. She opened the door. He was drenched to the bone, mud to the thigh, steam rising off him in the candlelight, and he had never in his life looked less like a duke or more like the boy in the cottage. He did not reach for her. He did not cross the threshold. He stood in the narrow hallway of the Rose and Crown, holding his hat in both hands like a farmer come courting, and he spent his minute like this. "Your mother's name was Anne. She was a schoolmaster's daughter, and your father married her lawfully in a stone church on the moors at 7 o'clock on a June morning because they couldn't wait and didn't care. The man who married them is sitting in my study drinking hot brandy at this moment, very much alive, very much furious, and he has the register with him. Your mother signed it in her own hand, small letters, proud. You were christened at the same font, Beatrice Anne. The Anne was for her." His voice dropped. "You are not what that paper says. You never were. The paper is forged, Beatrice, and I can prove it in any court in England. The forger misspelled the name of the witness, and the witness is alive to say so." Beatrice had backed up until the bed caught her knees and sat down without meaning to. "The portrait," she whispered. He took down the portrait. Because he couldn't walk past it, grief, Beatrice, not shame, it was never shame. He took one breath, and she saw him decide to give her the rest, all of it, in daylight together as he had promised. "There's more, and it's harder. Your father made a second will before he died. He was afraid of what he never said, but I think we both may guess, and he lodged it 200 miles away with the only man he trusted. Everything he owned outright he left to you. To my beloved eldest daughter in her mother's memory. Those are his words. It was never found because she made sure it was never looked for, and every shilling of it, every gown, every season, every candle in that house for 8 years, his jaw worked, was yours. You were not the poor relation, Beatrice. You were the heiress. They didn't hide you because you were worthless. They hid you because you were *owed*. The candle stub fluttered. Somewhere below, the inn clock struck the quarter hour. "My minute's up," Julian said quietly. Beatrice sat very still on the edge of the narrow bed, in the first room she had ever paid for, and felt her whole life turn over, every locked door, Every supper by the kitchen, every bless her, never intended for display, turning over like a ledger page, showing at last the entries that had been hidden on the other side. Not worthless, owed, not unloved, robbed. The room they'd given her had been small because the truth was so large. She looked up at the man dripping in her doorway, the man who had waited 12 years and ridden through a November storm, and was even now, keeping scrupulously to his 60 seconds because she had once been given so little choice in her life that he refused to take one more from her. "You once told me," she said unsteadily, "that a secret once it's out is only a thing you know. So here is a thing I know, Julian. I didn't leave because I believed her about my blood. Blood was only the excuse that fit. I left because 26 years is a long apprenticeship and I am very well trained, and when the silence came, her voice failed and she mended it. I balanced the account the only way I'd ever been taught. I'm telling you this because you should know what you're getting. It may take me years to unlearn. Then it will take us years." He said it the way he said everything that mattered, quietly, like a fact. "I have it on good authority the castaway was on his island 28 years, and he got off it all the same." And then, at last, he held out his hand, palm up, open, asking, "Come home, Beatrice, not to be rescued, to collect." Outside, without either of them noticing, the rain had begun to ease. The blue drawing room, 9 o'clock the same morning. Lady Fairfax had dressed for victory. She had heard the Duke ride out in the night and return at dawn with the girl, a scene, no doubt, tears in the rain, very affecting, and it changed nothing. Sentiment never changed arithmetic. Her deadline stood. She poured herself tea and was arranging her opening sentence when the doors opened and the arithmetic walked in. Julian first, with Beatrice on his arm in the blue silk gown, double-stitched, unmistakable, which was irritating. Then a thin man in black with a dispatch case. Then Rosalind, white-faced, who would not meet her mother's eye, carrying Lady Fairfax's cup stopped an inch from her lips, carrying the red dispatch box. And then last, leaning on a stick, an old man in a clergyman's collar. The cup came down onto its saucer with a crack. It was a very small sound, but Beatrice, watching her stepmother's face, would remember it all her life as the sound of a fortress falling, because Lady Fairfax knew him at once. You do not forge a dead man's name without first learning his living face. "Good morning, madam," said the Reverend Josiah Crane, C.R.A.N.E. What followed took less than half an hour, and Lady Fairfax spoke fewer than a dozen words through the whole of it. Grim laid the documents on the table one at a time, unhurried, like a man dealing a hand he had already seen, the affidavit with its misspelled witness, the Whitby letters proving Crane 200 miles from the deathbed he'd supposedly attended, the parish register, open to a June morning, the true will, seals verified. And from the red box, surrendered by Rosalind, its floorboard hiding place given up in a steady voice, while her mother stared at her as if at a stranger, the letters from the man in York who copied old hands, 7 years of them, itemized, priced. "You have one decision left to make in this house," Julian said when it was done, "and it is not yours, it's hers." He turned to Beatrice. "The magistrates would call it forgery, fraud, and theft of an inheritance. Any one of the three transports her, all three together." He let the sentence end itself. "Say the word and Grim swears out the complaint before noon." The room waited. Lady Fairfax sat rigid behind her cold tea, and for the first time in 26 years, Beatrice watched fear look out of those calculating eyes and found, probing the place where her hatred should have been, something that surprised her. Not forgiveness, never quite that, but a kind of terrible clarity. "No courts," Beatrice said at last. "No trial, not because you deserve mercy, but because I have sat in a small room my whole life on account of you, and I will not sit in a courtroom for the next 3 years on account of you too. You have had enough of my time." She rose, and it was strange and new, being the one standing while Lady Fairfax sat. Here are the terms, and Mr. Grimm has them in writing. You will sign over everything, the house, and whatever is left unspent, which he informs me is pitifully little. You will take the packet from Dover on Friday, and a cottage will be rented for you in Boulogne, and £40 a year paid to you there, paid, so that no one can say we starved you, and small asterisk, so that you will finally know precisely how it is lived on. You will not return to England. You will not write. And you will live, for whatever years remain to you, in 2 rooms on a fixed sum, unseen, uninvited, and unimportant. Beatrice paused at the door. I don't sentence you to prison. I sentence you to my childhood. You'll find the accounts balance. Lady Fairfax's mouth opened, and Beatrice saw the old machinery turn, hunting for the lever, the angle, the soft place, and find nothing. So she deployed the last weapon in the arsenal, the oldest one, and turned to her daughter. Rosalind, pack your things. We leave this asylum together. And Rosalind, the toast of the season, the prize, the true daughter, trained from the cradle to flinch at that exact tone, stood very still, her hands whitening on the back of a chair, and said the 4 hardest words of her gilded, obedient, terrified life. No, Mama, I'm not. She said it badly. Her voice shook and cracked, and she had to say the second half twice. Beatrice thought she had never heard anyone say anything so well. They were married on a bright, cold morning in December, in the small stone church at Ashworth Village, and it was nothing like the wedding of a duke. The county had expected 400 guests and got 14. Mrs. Hobbs wept from the opening hymn to the register, and had to be held up by the seamstress from York, who regarded the double-stitched blue silk in the candlelight with the grim pride of a general reviewing troops. Rosalind sat in the second pew, alone by her own choice, in a plain dress, and cried in a way that photographed nothing and meant everything. Mr. Grimm gave the bride away, having first, being Grimm, confirmed his legal standing to do so. And the marriage was performed by the Reverend Josiah Crane, aged 81, who had waited 30 years to finish what he'd started at that font, and who took the service at a magnificent, defiant, glacial pace, as if daring death itself to interrupt him before the register was signed. Beatrice signed it Beatrice Anne, in small letters and proud. It was done, and the bells were ringing, and 14 people were making the noise of 400, when Julian bent his head close to his wife's ear, and the Duke of Ashworth, who never forgot a debt, an apple, or a blue ribbon, whispered the words she would keep to the end of her days, longer than the silk, longer than the bells. They thought they sent me the wrong sister. They sent me the only one I ever asked for. 3 years later, there was a new rule in the library at Ashworth Hall, and it was strictly enforced. The great armchair by the fire, the one with the worn left armrest, belonged, between the hours of breakfast and luncheon, to the smallest person in the house. The smallest person in the house was 2.5 years old, had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and was named Anne. She could not read, of course. This did not stop her. She sat in the enormous chair with an enormous book open across her lap. It was nearly always the same book, the old one with the soft cover, which she was permitted to hold only with washed hands, and she turned the pages with tremendous care and told the story out loud to the fire, and the dog, and anyone else fortunate enough to be present. The story changed daily. The book did not. Her father claimed she had inherited the family library. Her mother said she had merely inherited the family habit of talking to strangers through windows. On this particular morning, a bright, cold one in early December, 3 years almost to the day since a wedding of 14 guests had outsung 400, the Duchess of Ashworth sat at the long table beneath the library window, doing the estate accounts. She did them in ink now. It was a small thing. Nobody else in the world would have noticed it or understood it. But every morning, when Beatrice dipped the pen and drew the first firm, permanent, unafraid line of the day, Some quiet ceremony took place that was part bookkeeping and part prayer of thanksgiving. And this morning, as most mornings, she had just finished ruling the page when she heard the sound of the pony trap on the gravel. And Anne abandoned Robinson Crusoe mid-shipwreck and flew to the window, shouting the single most beloved word in her small vocabulary. Rosa. Aunt Rosalind came in on a gust of cold air, in a plain wool dress and a plainer bonnet, her cheeks red from the drive, carrying a basket of Mrs. Hobbs's requested lemons and a slate under one arm. The slate had sums on it. Rosalind Fairfax, once the toast of a London season, taught the village school now arithmetic, penmanship, and, by particular demand of the parents, deportment. And it had taken her 2 years to stop being astonished that she was good at it, and a further year to stop being astonished that she was happy. She had never remarried. There had been offers. Beauty at 30 is still beauty, but Rosalind had spent her whole life being chosen for the shine of her, and she had discovered late the deep pleasure of being useful instead. Besides, she liked to say, I was engaged once to a man who loved my face, and I have never quite trusted anyone since. She scooped up her niece, kissed her, admired 6 imaginary chapters of Robinson Crusoe in a single breathless summary, and had just set the child down when she saw the letter lying on the corner of Beatrice's table. The paper was cheap, the direction was in a thin foreign clerk's hand, and the seal was black. The room went quiet in the particular way it did perhaps twice a year, when the post came from France. When, Rosalind said. Tuesday last, in her sleep the landlady writes. There was no illness, no, Beatrice paused, no warning. The landlady also writes that the rent was paid to the quarter's end and asks in the same sentence what is to be done with a red dispatch box, empty, and a quantity of gray silk. She turned the letter over in her hands. There was a note enclosed, for you. Rosalind sat down slowly on the window seat. Anne, with a small child's unerring instinct, climbed up beside her and put one starfish hand on her aunt's knee and left it there. The note was one line. Rosalind read it twice and then laughed, a strange, cracked, wet sound, and passed it over. And Beatrice read the last words Lady Fairfax would ever send across the channel. The £40 was paid punctually, which I confess I did not expect. Your sister keeps accounts like a tradesman, but she keeps them honestly, which is more than this world taught her. F***. That's it, Rosalind said. That's the whole of it. No goodbye. No, she gestured helplessly at 29 years of things a mother might have said. Do you know, I think that's the nearest she ever came in her life to an apology. One line of grudging bookkeeping. It's the nearest she ever came to the truth, Beatrice said quietly, so I intend to keep it. They sat with it a while, the two sisters in the bright cold light, the wrong one and the true one, the hidden one and the shown one, the two halves of one woman's long campaign, and it was Rosalind who finally broke, the way she'd been trying not to break for 3 years, ever since a night at a window with her hand pressed to the glass. I have to say it. You've never let me say it. Every time I begin, you pour tea at me. Beatrice, it's a form of violence, and she's gone now, and if I don't say it today, I never shall. Her hands were shaking, her voice was not. I knew, not everything, but enough, always *enough. I knew about the box under the floor. I knew the dress was scissors and not maids. I stood at a window and watched you walk into the rain, and I chose to be the daughter it was easier to be. And you, her voice finally went, you gave me an income and a pew at your wedding and your child, and in 3 years you have never once asked me to account for it. Why? I've needed to know why since the morning you stood in that drawing room. You made her balance the books. Why have you never made me? Little Anne looked up, worried by the tears, and Beatrice crossed the room and sat down on the other side of her, so that the child was harbored between them, and looked at her sister over the small dark head. Because you came to the door, she said. Rosalind stared at her. That's the whole of the answer, Rosa. That night at 3 in the morning, you came to the door and you knocked. It took you 6 hours at that window and you came. She never came. Not in 26 years, not with a black seal, not in one line of grudging bookkeeping. She never once arrived at any door in her life except to take something on the other side of it. Beatrice reached across their niece's head and took her sister's cold hand. You arrived as the wrong person that first day in your dove-gray traveling dress, with your chin at the correct angle. Oh, I wanted to slam every door in the county. And then you spent 3 years becoming the person who knocks. In this house, nobody is turned away for having arrived once upon a time as the wrong person. If we held to that rule, and here the Duchess of Ashworth smiled, they'd have had to turn away the bride. The library door opened. Julian came in with the cold still on his coat, took in the black seal, the wet faces, and the barricade of small daughter between them, and being the man he was, said nothing at all. He simply crossed to the fire, added a log, and settled into the second armchair to wait, in the particular listening silence Beatrice had loved before she'd known his name. It was Anne who mended the morning. She wriggled down from the window seat, retrieved the great soft-covered book from the great chair, hauled it into her father's lap, climbed up after it, opened it to no page in particular, and announced, with the gravity of a bishop, "Now the man is on the island, and he is very sad, because he thinks nobody is coming." "A dreadful situation," said the Duke. "What happens to him?" "Somebody comes," said Anne, turning pages. "But it takes long time, because the sea is very big and the island is very small, but they still find it." "How?" asked her aunt from the window seat. Anne considered the question with enormous seriousness, looking from her aunt to her mother to the fire. "They just keep looking," she said at last, "until the island turns into a home." And she settled back against her father's chest and returned to the shipwreck, mumbling the story to herself, a little too quietly. "A little louder, if you please," murmured the Duke of Ashworth into his daughter's hair, his eyes finding his wife's across the firelight, 12 years and a lifetime later. "The hero cannot hear you." Outside, the December sun stood high over the park, over the village and its school, over the little stone church where the whole history was written in a register in 2 proud hands, one large and one small. And if, in later years, the people of that county told the story at all, they told it the way the housekeeper, Mrs. Hobbs, always ended it, over the good tea, to anyone who would listen. That once a family sent a duke the wrong sister, and that the duke, being a careful man who checked all deliveries, found he had received the only thing he had ever ordered. Because sometimes the wrong sister is simply the right one, sent too early into a world that hadn't yet learned how to see her. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.